Evening, everybody. Thank you all very much for coming and spending your Friday evening with us. My name's Roger Nelson, and it's my pleasure to be the host and moderator for this evening. I teach art history at NTU, and I was one of the curators for the exhibition, Living Pictures, Photography in Southeast Asia. So, before beginning with an introduction for our very special guest, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First, thank you to the National Gallery Singapore's curatorial programs team, especially Kalisha, Erica, Sama and Gina, for organising tonight's event. A big shout out to the other curators of the Living Pictures exhibition, Charmaine To, the lead curator, together with Go Ziying, Roy Ng and Kenneth Tay. And once again, thank you all for being here. So, with no further ado, I will introduce our very special guest, Dinh Q, who's joining us from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. As many of you will know, Dinh is one of Southeast Asia's most internationally acclaimed contemporary artists, well known throughout the region and beyond. He has a BA from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and an MFA from the School of Visual Arts in New York City. He has exhibited at museums and galleries internationally, including a recent solo presentation at the Musée Quai Branly in France. He's exhibited at important biennales internationally, including the Carnegie International, Documenta, the Asia Pacific Triennial, and of course the Singapore Biennale. Many of you may be familiar with his work from the recent Gallery Children's Biennale, which was on view in the Padang Atrium and in the concourse areas. And of course, his major installation, Crossing the Farther Shore, which we'll be talking about today, is a key highlight in the Living Pictures exhibition. Dinh's work has been collected by museums internationally, including MoMA in New York, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, of course the Singapore Art Museum and National Gallery Singapore, and many others beside. He's the recipient of numerous prestigious awards, including the Prince Class Fund, and he's the founder of the Vietnam Foundation for the Arts and Sàn Arts in Ho Chi Minh City, which we'll be speaking about today. So with no further ado, let's begin. Dinh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you, let's dive straight into talking about the work Crossing the Farther Shore, which is on show in the exhibition. And I'd like to ask you simply, how did you go about making this work?
This is one of the earliest work that started this project now. But so I think this work was, I started collecting this kind of photographs a long time ago. 1993 was the first time I came back to Vietnam. And I discovered this shop that sells secondhand stuff. Some antiques, some fake, a lot of fakes antiques, and a lot of these photographs that were sitting in boxes. Most of they told me the reason why who they're selling these photographs to were basically movies maker, because they would need this thing for their set, maybe to decorate the scene or something like that. And so instantly I start to dig into these boxes that they have, and the reason why I did that was I was hoping somehow I would find my family photographs, and because when we escaped Vietnam in 1978 by boat, we didn't bring much, so all the family photographs were left behind. And so I never have, even today, I still don't have any of my childhood photographs. So I was hoping to find them, but of course I never found any of them. So along the way, I sort of select the one that remind me of my childhood and start the collection that way. And so in a way, in the beginning, these photographs were a kind of surrogate family photograph for me. And so after a while, I started collecting them, and then this is one of the earliest work. I think it was like 1999. I was asked to do a small show in one of the university in Southern California. And I want to kind of make a quilt about Vietnam. And so this piece was more of a quilt, thinking of a quilt, kind of showcase the moments that the world never get to see during the Vietnam War. These are, of course, we only photograph when we, we happy at happy moments, and we want to remember them, and so we would document them, and that's how this photograph to me. And so they kind of show a very different Vietnam than the war photographs that the world kind of seeing so much. And so this was the process of making the work. But then the collection became really big.
You started collecting already in about 1993, you said, right?
Yeah.
After returning to Vietnam. And
Yes.
the first work with these photographs was maybe 1999, so quite a number of years of collecting before you began to make work with it. What drove you to start producing artwork with these photographs?
I think in the beginning I was for this was just a one time. I thought it was going to be a one time piece of work, and so I think I was just for the first process was just as I mentioned before, I want the world to see a different side of Vietnam, because all these photographs are before 1975, so they show a Vietnam that's very different. And then as I collect more and more, and then, recently, so I started to kind of question what's going to happen to this photograph when I die? I mean, who's going to recognize the importance of these photographs? Because these photographs are not just a family photograph of Southern Vietnam before 1975, but they're also a record of Southern Vietnam before 1975. Because if you know the history of Vietnam, because the Vietnam War is also a civil war between the North and the South. The Northern Communist government and the Southern government, they were fighting against each other. And so when the Northern government took over the South, they tried to erase the history of the South, because for the South, it was a civil war, and for the North, it was a war against the imperialist American. And so the history of the South doesn't fit into the narrative of the North. And so when they came in, they took, they basically banned all the writing before 1975. Books, magazine, everything were banned. Music were banned, all song, and it was only until recently that some of the books are allowed to be republished. And of course, the street name were changed. Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon became Ho Chi Minh City. And so that whole the history of the South were erased and trying to kind of completely new. And so these photographs, I also realized they are very important. They are documentation of a Southern Vietnam that the North is trying to erase. And so that is important for me. So when I amassed this major amount, and I think right now I have something like 180 kilos, like about 8 boxes, huge boxes. And so the question is, when I'm gone, what's going to happen? Are they going to go back to this secondhand shop, or worse yet, end up in the dumpster? And so what I decided to do was, as an artist, I can give it values by making art out of it. And this is something that I learned by studying about, Marcel Duchamp's work when he signed on the urinal. And, a urinal is just something. And when he signed it, now it's become, one of the major important artwork. And so I thought, okay, if that's the lesson. It's like I can give this photograph value by making art out of them. And hopefully an institution will collect the artwork. And that means now they have to take care of these photographs. And I'm very happy to say that NGS now is the caretaker of this a large chunk of these photographs.
I'm not sure if the conservators are quite so happy, but I think it's really interesting that you pointed out that making artwork with these photographs was not only an intervention in the kind of international perception of Vietnam, seeing Vietnam from the outside solely through the lens of the war, but also that it was an intervention in the way that visual culture is represented within the country, the kind of erasure of South Vietnam's histories. And for me, one of the things that's most powerful about the work in the show, Crossing the Farther Shore, is this kind of tension between, as you said, the happy atmosphere in many of the photographs. We only take photographs when we're happy. And the sense of sadness and loss with knowing that these photographs belong to people who fled as refugees or perhaps even passed away during the war. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about your own kind of emotional experience of going through these thousands upon thousands of photographs.
You know, I lived with this photograph for so long. From 93, start collecting to, at some point, you know, I was just like, the words were out to the junk buyer. And so they, you know, whatever they have, they just call me. And at some point, I was buying this photograph by the kilo. They would like, you know, bring the scale and they're like, okay, we have 2 kilo and we'll charge you this is what. And it was kind of interesting to see how all this memory are now measured in by weight rather than, you know, by other measurements. But they still bring a lot of kind of sense of loss for me, because a lot of my childhood, it's kind of reflected in there. And it's still difficult for me to do, but somehow making the work, it make it easier.
Part of what you've done with these photographs in Crossing the Farther Shore and in many of these other works that came before is simply stitching them together into this kind of open weave, a kind of a net formation. And as we can see in the image on the screen, half of the photographs are facing outwards and half of them are facing inwards, meaning that we see the photograph not only as an image, but also as an object. Yes. And we can see not only the images that have been captured by the camera, but also the words that have been inscribed on the back of them. Can you talk a little bit about those inscriptions on the back of the photographs?
There are 3 set of kind of narratives in this work. So the first one is the actual writing that existed on this photograph. So most of the time it's just somebody dedicate the photograph to their friend or the dates of where it is and what it is, and maybe a little bit writing about that, their feelings at that day. And then the second set of memory that I add on was in UC Irvine, University of Irvine. They have collected testimonies from Vietnamese overseas about their journey from Vietnam to America and their memories of Vietnam. And so, and it reflected basically my same journey. And so I want that narrative to kind of come back into this work as a way to kind of to share those experiences. And then the third one is this epic poem. And not only do I identify with this, but I think many Vietnamese overseas identify with this epic poem. It's The Tale of Q, which is a story, this poem I think is in the 18th century, written by a Vietnamese writer, and basically it's a story of a young woman through circumstances she had to sell herself, and she was sold and sent far away. But throughout those process, those journey, she was trying to coming back home. All she wanted was to come home, and in the end, she was able to come back home. And so I think that her journey is kind of reflected in many of the Vietnamese overseas desire. And so we kind of share that story. And so that story also is fragments of it scattered through the work.
That fragmentation is really, I think, key to the work. That any snatch of these stories, be it from the UC Irvine testimonies or from the poetry or the original inscriptions, which are in Vietnamese, in French, some even in Chinese and English, we only ever see a fragment. We can never kind of connect the story together. So that sense of sort of longing and loss as well is really pervasive in this work. I wanted to ask you about the form that the work takes, Crossing the Farther Shore, because after several works like the one we saw in the earlier slide, where the quilt kind of hangs as itself, with this work you take quite a leap forward, where it comes together into 7 different structures. Can you talk about what inspired the form of those structures?
I never see photography as two-dimensional, and that this is something that I remember my classmates in the photography department in New York is like, why are you in department? Because I was not interested in taking the photograph. I was more interested in the photograph as a material from there to begin, rather than to. And so I think that instinct or whatever, it's always there. So when I was making this, even though it's actually a 3-dimensional, the earlier work, but I always feel like it needs to be 3-dimensional, it would be more 3-dimensional. And so after I decided to revisit this work again, and start making, and so what you see is 7 structure, and this is partly come from a kind of personal memory. When we were in the refugee camp in Thailand, and we would be in big hall, and we would be share the space with other family, and each family would have a few structures, a few mosquito nets at night hang on, and each mosquito group, a net group would be, a family would have 2, 3 together, and there was the kind of the reason why the structure it is like that. But at the same time, a part of me, I study art in America, and I was thinking of the minimalist cubes. And I've always, when I was studying minimalism, I always have such big problem with them, because in the middle, this is like that movement was in the 60s and the 70s at the height of the Vietnam War. And these artists were making this structure that completely ignore everything that's happening in the world. And sometimes I just wonder, like, whenever I go to see this work, I mean, they're beautiful, but I would want to, like, kind of use a crowbar and open it up, because I'm sure it's infested with, maggots in there. But that's the thing. It's like, so in a way, this is a kind of a little kind of response to the minimalist cube, and fill it with all these stories. In that.
One of the effects of that kind of structure, these 7 cubes that perhaps recall mosquito nets, perhaps minimalist cubes. I think for some of our Singaporean visitors, they bring to mind the camouflage nets that people have experience of using in their military training. But one of the effects of these structures is that you keep moving closer and further away from the work, further away to see the overall shape, and then closer in to see the details of the images and the inscriptions, and then back and then forward. And that kind of amplifies that experience of fragmentation. Every time you come closer, you see a different image, you read a different glimpse of a story. And so I wanted to just return again to the physical, laborious process of making the work, stitching these images together in your studio. What was that like? Was that something that you did alone or with others? And
let's talk a little bit about the fragmentation and the way how you interact with this work. And it's really fun, interesting, because it's the same thing with the photo weavings. Is that the photo weaving, I think many of you are familiar with photo weaving. It's also functioning the same thing. It's like even though it's two-dimensional, but if you move and you stand in a different place, you see different things. And you step far away, you see the whole thing, and you step closer, everything is fragmented. And so I think when even before making this work, that the weaving always have that kind of three-dimensionality, and that how people still have to kind of move in order to see the work as a whole. And so it's kind of, I guess it's continue on to this crossing the farther shore. In terms of making the work, and again, it's really kind of full circle in a way. My aunt, who taught me how to do grass mat weaving, she was the one working with me on this piece. And yeah, so she was teaching, stitching it together with me and putting it together. And so yeah, we were working together on this piece for a long time. Yeah.
I think that kind of tactile process is often important in your works, the sort of learning through our fingertips, not only through our eyes, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I did want to come back to talking a bit about the photo weaving again later when we talk about your practice in sort of broader terms, but I wonder if we could move on to talking a little bit about the Erasure work, which is another kind of major installation in which you use these found photographs that you'd bought by the kilogram from the junk shops in Saigon. What's interesting about this work, I think, is that you interweave the stories of the Vietnamese refugees with another quite fraught political history as well. And so by doing so, you point to something that I think is there in Crossing the Farther Shore as well, that shift from the very specific Vietnamese histories to perhaps more regional or even universal kinds of stories. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about this work.
I was asked by Jean Sherman of the Sherman Foundation in Sydney, Australia, she commissioned a new work for her space. And so at first I didn't know what I was going to do because, I mean, I've been to Australia, but I never really spent much amount of time there and really didn't know what my relationship to Australia was. So, and then something happened that there was a boat that came on the shore of Australia, and basically it came to this rocky cliff. And that day the wave was quite rough, and basically smashed the refugee boat against the cliff. And I think a few people were safe, but many of them drowned. And the people on the cliff, they couldn't do anything because it was so high, but they videoed the whole thing. And what in the end was, the end of the video was that the clothing and the shoes and the flip-flop, they were floating on the water. And that just kind of bring back a lot of kind of memories for me. And I thought that was, this was, I need to kind of talk about this. And I think, before this, Australia was really against this immigrant, people that were arriving, because they would calling them names and giving them name and not really see them as human, basically. And so I think that video somehow, the clothing floating in the water, the shoes floating, I think it kind of awoke something in the Australians' consciousness that these people, they're not what they call queue jumpers, and things like that. So that really kind of wanted me to make this work. And so I decided that to bring my own history. I was also a boat person. And so I sent in a proposal, but also I wanted to bring in Australian history of being boat person, because they all came from Europe on boats, so that, all these kind of layers of it. And so the exhibition, the installation is called Erasure. And it's that effort to erase this kind of history, when in fact it's their history, and yet they don't want to acknowledge it. And now these people are arriving, and they don't want to acknowledge that they're doing exactly what their ancestor did. And so I thought, of my memory, of my history. And then so I want, there's also a large community of Vietnamese overseas also who arrive in Australia. Boat people also arrive in Australia in the 70s and the 80s as well. So so basically I restage the crashing of this boat, but what the boat crashed and what is spilled out from the boat was all these thousands of family photographs that, kind of bring in the kind of the human aspect. And as an audience, you are welcome to kind of pick them up and look at it. And at that time, we will also have a component where we want to scan and archive this photograph, but the archive process haven't been so good, so we discontinue that. So in the back you see is a video of a replica of Captain Cook's ship that landed in Australia, but now there's a replica of Captain Cook's ship prominently displays and sail around once a year, I think, in Sydney Harbor as well. So it's quite problematic, at the same time trying to erase the history, but at the same time they try to celebrate it. And so anyway, we built a small replica and we burned it and we video it, because one of the things about the boat that arrived in Australia is that the refugee boat arrived in Australia was that they would burn the boat when it landed, because of fear of rats or whatever come on the boat arrive in Australia. But at the same time, it's a process of erasing evidence of what's happening. And so that's why the name of Erasure was for this installation.
Thanks, Din. I think this work is interesting in that it brings us from, I think, the concern with Vietnam's histories out to a concern with broader histories of migration, of people seeking refuge beyond Vietnam's shores. But it also, of course, reminds us of the omnipresence of photography throughout your practice, which I think is something we wanted to talk about a bit more today, given the context of you being here for the Living Pictures photography exhibition. So maybe if we skip to the next work in the deck of slides, which is The Deep Blue Sea, one of a series of works you've made in which photographic images have been digitally manipulated to become, again, not two-dimensional images, but three-dimensional objects, and to become quite illegible as images as well. So I wonder if you could talk perhaps specifically about this work and a bit more generally about what it is that keeps drawing you back to different processes of manipulating photography in your practice.
I think I came into photography in the 90s, and I don't know if you know the history of contemporary photography in America, but in the 90s there was a flurry of artists that were pushing, kind of experimenting with photography quite a bit. And so that was, maybe that's with the spirit that I came into photography. So I've always kind of questioning about photography, about the medium, about the material of it. And so, I start out like everybody else, well, maybe not like everybody else anymore, but in my generation, um, kind of falling in love with photography. When it was in analog, when it was chemical, when there were light sensitive paper and you have to be in a dark room and you make sure there's no light coming in because you would destroy the film and the paper. And then, you put the negative on the projector, and then you print the work, and then you put in the chemical, and you move it around, and then slowly the image emerge. It's magical, And so I was a believer in photography until I got a little bit wiser, maybe. I don't know. And then, I go to college, and I start learning about how malleable photography, how you can so easily manipulate it. And then that relationship changed. And I think then that's when I really start seeing photography as a material rather than as a final product. And so with this work, I was thinking about, I started from a kind of, my relationship in the beginning was, with the analog photography, it was very different. But now, today, we're in digital age now, and photography is in that world now. And I was thinking, not only the malleable in terms of how the meaning can be construct or change so easily, but now physically, they're so easily changing now. And at some point, they're also invisible. It's quite interesting because, for an image, let's say an image you have on your computer and you send it to your phone, it's wild, it's in the air, and you don't know what it is. Somehow it ends in your phone. And so this like invisibleness of it, I was kind of fascinated by that. But I also was like thinking about it's just 0 and 1, and how it can be manipulated in any way you want, the image itself.
And often that manipulation is as invisible as sending the photograph through the air, right? So what you do here is you make hyper-visible that process of digital manipulation.
Yeah, I mean, and it now is, I love this because it's like syrup. So it used to be the negative. Okay, so first it was light, and then you capture on a negative, and then you project it, but now it's this file. And it just moved through cables and moved through the air, and it's kind of like water. It's just moving through things, and so I was really kind of fascinated by this process, and I want somehow to showcase that process. The final product was also, at the same time, the lab that I was working with in Saigon, they were telling me they were going to stop processing this light-sensitive paper because it's so costly to bring in somebody to fix it, because they have to fly the technician from China in, even to fix the machine, because nobody fixed it. And Fuji stopped making this machine anymore. And so eventually it's going to end it. And so I thought, okay, what can I do with what I can? So this is the print that basically Fuji paper, or they make this roll of light-sensitive paper 50 meters long. And I say, okay, what I can do to push, just like one image into, so basically, and I can, because it's digital now, I can stretch one image to 50 meters long, 1 meter 10 wide. And so these are like single image that have been stretched. I mean, it could be stretched longer, but unfortunately, the paper is only 50 meters long. So this is it's kind of amazing that they become this abstraction now.
You talked about coming of age as an artist in the 1990s and your awareness of other artists at that time, kind of thinking about photography in various critical and conceptual ways, you know, the emergence of things like photography as sculpture, for example. And I think we can see a very clear kind of lineage of that in a work like this. But you also came of age as an artist at a time when you were very aware of the perception of Vietnam outside the country as being so almost completely shaped by photography. You know, the war in Vietnam is kind of infamous for being the first war that was broadcast live on television and photographed, you know, from every angle, in every moment. So I wonder whether that personal connection you have to that history is something that you've spoken about a lot in relation to many of your works. Is that history of the war in Vietnam and of your own biography relevant for thinking about a work like this, which is so much about the manipulation of the medium itself?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. I think when I started, you know, college, and I was learning about photography, but at the same time, I was also learning about the history of the Vietnam War. And you start to understand how the world saw Vietnam was basically at that time to the 80s and the 90s was that what the world saw Vietnam was a war, and that is only through those images of war. And so as a result, that's how the world saw me. You know, and I always kind of was very uncomfortable with that. And also, I know that this photograph didn't tell the whole story of Vietnam. And then you have, you know, at that time also, all this Hollywood movie came out about Vietnam as well. So you have Born on 4th of July, Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter, and all this coming out at the same time. And again, you know, we are only seeing in that perspective. It's like we're either the victim, the dead bodies, the prostitute, or the farmer didn't speak anything, didn't say anything. So, so my kind of relationship with photography changed drastically. I start to kind of understand that, well, maybe I start to see photography because the world believes in photography. Well, most of us don't, not so much these days, but back then it was, you know, they believe in the truth in photography. And so that's also led to, you know, where I cut up the photograph and start weaving other narratives in to tell that, you know, there's so many layers to a story that a photograph, a two-dimensional photograph, cannot tell. And that was, I think, the beginning of my kind of the change of my relationship with photography. And so photography, so I've always kind of end up taking photography apart and then put it together rather than accept it as it is.
Maybe that brings us to another body of work that I wanted to ask you about, which is Adrift in Darkness, where you very literally cut up these photographs and render them, again, illegible as images, but very poignant as objects. I read that the photographs you're using in these sculptures are photographs related to refugees from Africa and the Middle East who are seeking new homes in Europe, and again, as in Australia, being turned away.
But also photographs of people protesting.
Can you talk more about how you found these photographs and what you did to them?
They're primarily online that I was able to pull down and images that Again, going back to the weaving, the photo weavings, I've always want to make them three-dimensional, but I never have a good reason to. I just didn't want to make a basket with images on it. So, it would be too kind of cliche or something. And so when STPI asked me to come and work, and so I was, and actually at that time I was looking a lot into Japanese basket weavings. There's some really amazing Japanese bamboo weaving that are completely abstract, not just like a perfect form or anything. They create some really amazing pieces, and I was inspired by that. So when I came, I wanted to make this kind of rocks that floating through the air. There were no contemporary arts in Saigon anyway. In Hanoi was better, but there was nothing in Saigon. There were Blue Space, but Blue Space were doing project once in a blue moon and not always continuous program. And so I think for me, I need a community. I need, and for the community, they also need a place to come together. And so that's how we started, how Sàn Arts came into being as a way for the community to come together to support each other and to kind of allow idea to kind of be experiment and to try out and fail and whatever, because there were no other space allow all these young artists that want to try new things to do it. And so that was the role of Sàn Arts. And because I was in certain position that I can help to make it happen. So so it was just, that was the way it is. I'm sure other people, if they were in the position as I was, they would do the same thing. And so now it's 15 years later, and it's like 3 or 4 generations of people who run that now, which is kind of great. Now I'm just kind of I hate to say this word, but I'm just the elder now. And I make sure that they survive. But I've always wanted that, I'm never somebody who's interested in being a director or something like that, but it's good to have each generation, the new generation, to take over, and they determine the program, and because they are more in tune with what's happening in the community than I do. So so now we have, I think, a third now, third or fourth now. So it's good. Now we have Mary and Vicky. And they're doing great. I just offer advice now. So,
As an elder.
Yes, as an elder.
Thanks, Din. Do we have questions from the audience? I can see several hands. There are microphones on the side that will come to you. Maybe at the front here on the left, and also at the back there on the right. I'll take 2 questions at a time.
Thank you for your inspiring talk. My name is Tomo, originally from Japan, and I'm currently based in Hoi An in Vietnam. I have 2 questions. One about the crossing further ashore. I realized that, like you were saying, you can go close and you can step back and get different sense of being there. I also noticed that I couldn't get inside the mosquito net, which is what I thought I would be doing with mosquito net. So I wondered if that was a kind of decision that you've made, Mr. Din, about protecting a space or creating a kind of memory that is not interfered. My second question, I'll make it short, is by you deciding to go back to Vietnam, what kind of impact or inspirations have you had because you were physically in Vietnam?
The crossing the farther shore. Yes, I decided that the audience cannot enter the space, the mosquito net, because I want the audience also to be aware that you can never be fully kind of understand what we went through. You can only be an outside looking in, and you can get a glimpse of it, but you never will kind of fully understand my experience and the many Vietnamese experience. And simply by stepping inside, I don't think you will be capable of it too. So, so that was the decision to close the space and not allow the audience to enter. The second question is, when I first came back to Vietnam in 1993, I knew that I was supposed to be in Vietnam. I deep down I knew, but at the same time I also realized that it was very much Americanized, and so it took a long process to kind of coming back and learning how to be Vietnamese again. But I think there's something that draw me there, and I think in part that's the inspiration. The stories, the narratives are there. The experiences of many are there that I share with. And so it definitely inform and enrich my practice over the years.
I think there was another question.
Yeah,
at the back.
up here. Welcome back. You know, the last time I saw your work was actually Deep Blue Sea, and I stood next to it. It was beautiful, but it was really overwhelming. You felt like these were really big waves coming down on you, and I didn't realize that you had started collecting photographs and invoking memory and kind of a look back kind of posture that you've taken. So I wanted to ask you if you have thought about or you're thinking about working on photography and the future. And the future that I would like to ask you about is on climate change and the prospect of climate refugees that presumably would come in boats. I don't know the situation in Vietnam, but we certainly talk about rising sea levels in Singapore quite a lot. And there's also rising sea levels in Bangladesh already. So the specter of new types of people on the boat and how that relates to what you can do with photography and the fact that you've had so much experience with the subject. Are you thinking about this?
That's also a very big subject, and I just spent 20 years with the Vietnam. But I actually, funny thing is, I mean, not specifically about the climate refugees and things like that, but I was in Amsterdam in December, and because this year is the 50th anniversary of many of the European countries normalize relationship with Vietnam. And so I'm meeting a few foundations because I want to, I'm working with a few of the consulate in Ho Chi Minh City to maybe, I don't know if it's possible, but we are trying to put together an exhibition to kind of for this 50th anniversary. And one of the issues, and I think maybe it will be the main issue, was the climate change and the water rising. And so when I was in Amsterdam, I was actually asking around for artists and actually for engineers, and see if they can come to Vietnam to do maybe a round table or something about the because rising water level, because the Mekong Delta is only 1.5 meters higher than the sea level. So, so in 50 years, I think the Mekong Delta will not be around anymore. But so that's as far as it gets. I think I haven't really looked deeply into the issues yet.
Yep. Thank you. So I would like to draw a comparison between your works Crossing the Farther Shore and Erasure with some of your earlier works. So I think there's a difference regarding the nature of the photos that you use. So in many of your earlier works, you use images from mass media or from the internet, which are highly reproducible, and you transform them in a way. And in Crossing the Farther Shore, you also use images and you transform them, but I think the nature is a bit different in that these images are file photographs, and in a way, I think they exist in a kind of original forms, in the sense that they are not reproducible. So I'm just curious to know whether there was any attempt to, for example, digitally scan them. So in a way, this would be a method for example, an art collector or historian to preserve images and in a way to attribute significance to this event in history that's in a way different from the kinds of artistic gestures that you did.
In Erasure, there's a component that I try to do, but it's not very successful, and so I'm not quite sure I'm continue with it. But basically, in the exhibition, there is a station. If you look on, there's a person over there. She's sitting there, and basically, whatever photograph the audience brought to her, she will scan it, and it will be archived into an online archive, and it's divided into group like wedding, sport, and headshots and things like that. And that was the first attempt to kind of archiving this, because I want not only to preserve them, but also for the Vietnamese overseas to be able to access them and maybe find their own family photographs. And then also, I hope, in the future, historian can access them. And so in a way, I was inspired by Atlas Group. There was this group of artists that in the Palestine. Yeah, they also, their country went through war and everything, and many of photographs end up abandoned, and now they start to, they built this foundation called the Atlas Group Foundation, and basically they amass a large amount of photographs, vernacular photographs, and they now have a foundation, a set that take care of it, and they invite, I think they also invite artists to come in and curate the collection sometime as well. But that's a lot of work. So I'm trying to find an easier way. I'm not quite, between Sàn Arts, I don't think I can start another foundation. Yeah, so.
I'd like to ask a follow-up about that. I mean, you spoke at the very beginning about your experience of finding these photographs when you first returned to Vietnam and collecting them in the hope of finding your own family photographs, which of course hasn't happened. What has been the response, though, from other people who've shared your life experience, other overseas Vietnamese, seeing photographs like these that have this very strong sense, not just of nostalgia, but of a very personal kind of connection?
People have written to us that they found their family photograph in the work. Yeah, so I think actually this exhibition was quite interesting. This was the first time that really, we just randomly picked a photograph out of this the pile and printed in the I think there was a brochure, and the brochure was sent all the way to France. And the brochure was, I think, have the image of a junior, no, elementary or junior high school or something like that. It's I think it was a French school in Ho Chi Minh City. And the lady that got the brochure found that she was in the photograph when she was a student in Ho Chi Minh City. And so, and then, you know, over the years, the Crossing the Farther Shore showing in Houston and in other places, people have kind of leave comment that they found their families in the photograph. But I think what really more important is that the comments have been not so much about finding the family photograph, but brought them memories of Vietnam, of their experiences. And I think that's, so in a way, I guess they share my experience of these photographs are not my photograph, but we all kind of adopt this photograph as our own in a way.
Kind of chosen family album, right?
Yeah.
What would you do if one of these people who found themselves or their own family photographs asked for them back?
Well, now that's the NGS problem now.
Thanks, Tin. Are there any other questions from the audience? There's one just here on.
Hi. So my question is more of like, since you mentioned that you bought these photographs in bulk, right? And obviously there's a lot of like, I imagine you have to go through like so many photographs when you buy them all at once. And also like when we talk about archiving and remembering all these photographs, I'm just curious, I guess, when, for example, when you choose the photographs to put together in your quilting, or even like when you shred them and then you put them together again, is there a particular like thought process? Like, do you unconsciously like categorize the photographs that you find, or like do you just I don't know, maybe like pick out the ones or like categorize them together, even like for like Adrift, when audiences can select a photo, so they choose the photo. So I'm wondering if you do that selection also when you are looking through the photographs yourself.
No, actually, when we made Crossing the Farther Shore, basically whatever photograph was in the pile, we just pick it up and kind of put it together. I didn't want to curate it. I want it to be as is, because the diversity of the photograph are just amazing. That's how kind of family photo album function. The kind of, a picture of here, a picture of there. And so it never crossed my mind to curate the photograph in the work.
Final questions? Not, I have one. Can you tell us what you're working on now? What's coming next for you?
Now this is, I haven't started, but I've been looking a lot into women's during the war in Vietnam. But I was kind of, I feel in terms of the Vietnam War, they play a very big role in it, and yet they haven't really received the recognition that they should. But also some of the women that was a big part of the Vietnam War, and one of the women in the 60s was Madame Như. And I really think she's an amazing woman, very outspoken, and unfortunately she's not a very good politician. But I think she was very forward-thinking. And so now I'm kind of looking at her, and I'm doing research about her, and I don't know, I hope something interesting will come out of this process. Yeah.
Something to look forward to. Thank you so much, Dinh, for joining us this evening. If there are no final questions from the audience, then perhaps we'll leave it there. Once again, thank you everyone for coming to join us and spend your Friday evening with us here at the gallery. Living Pictures Photography in Southeast Asia remains on view right through until August. So please do come and see the show. There's lots to take in. Thank you for being with us, Dinh, and good evening.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.